Richard Whitmore slammed the marriage contract onto the table and told his daughter she would be sold to a man 3 times her age before the month was out. Evelyn stared at the paper, her own name written across it like livestock on a bill of sale. "You can't do this to me," she whispered. "It's already done," he said. "You belong to me until I say you don't." That night, he locked her bedroom door from the outside. What he didn't know was that his daughter had already decided to run, and she would rather die free than live one more day on. Before we begin, if you believe no father should ever own his daughter, take a second to subscribe. Follow this story all the way to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels tonight. Now let's begin. The paper was still lying between them when Evelyn Whitmore realized her hands had stopped shaking. That was the strange part. For 6 years, she had trembled in this house. She had trembled at the sound of her father's boots on the stairs, at the way he set down a glass, at the particular silence that came before his temper broke. But now, staring at her own name inked across a marriage contract, like a brand burned into a steer's hide, she felt something colder and steadier than fear. "Read it," Richard Whitmore said. "I read it." "Then you know it's settled." "I know what you wrote," Evelyn said. "That doesn't make it settled." Her father's jaw worked. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, and he'd spent 20 years making sure everyone in the county understood exactly how much space he was entitled to take up in a room. He took up all of it now. "You'll marry Silas Crane," he said, 3 weeks from Sunday. "You'll wear your mother's dress, you'll smile for the guests, and you'll be grateful a man of his standing would take a girl with nothing. I have nothing because you gambled it away." The words were out before she could stop them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Evelyn watched her father's face go from red to a deep, ugly plum, and she understood she'd crossed a line that had been drawn a long time ago and never once tested. "Say that again," he said quietly. "You heard me. Say it again." "You lost the ranch at a card table," Evelyn said, and her voice didn't break, and that frightened her more than anything. "You lost the cattle, you lost Mama's savings, and now you want to sell the last thing you've got left, which is me." The slap came so fast she didn't see his hand move. Her head snapped sideways. Heat bloomed across her cheek, sharp and immediate, and she tasted copper on the inside of her lip. But she didn't fall. That was the second strange thing. For 6 years, she had fallen down away into herself, into a small locked room somewhere behind her own eyes, where nothing could reach her. This time she stayed standing, and she turned her face slowly back toward him, and she looked her father in the eye. "You'll have to hit me harder than that," she said, "if you want me to say yes." "Get to your room, Papa! Get," he roared, "to your room." She went. Not because she was afraid, though she was, but because she needed to be alone before he could see the thing that had just been born in her chest. It was small and hot, and it had no name yet. Later, she would call it a decision. Behind her, she heard the key turn in the lock. Bess Turner had worked in the Whitmore house for 19 years, and she had a way of knocking that no one else had 2 soft raps a pause, then a third. It meant, "It's only me." It meant, "He's not with me." It had meant safety to Evelyn since she was a little girl. The key scraped. The door opened a hand's width. "Brought you supper," Bess whispered. "He said no supper." I said a body can't sign a wedding contract if she's fainted dead from hunger, and he didn't have an answer to that. The old woman slipped inside and pressed a plate into Evelyn's hands. Bread, cold beef, and apple. "Eat." "I'm not hungry." "Didn't ask if you were hungry. I said eat." Evelyn ate. Somewhere in the middle of the bread, the tears finally came, and she let them because Bess was the only person left in the world she could cry in front of. "He hit me," Evelyn said. "I saw the mark." "He's going to sell me, Bess, to Silas Crane, like I'm a heifer he's short on feed for." Bess sat down heavy on the edge of the bed and took Evelyn's face in both her hard old hands, turning it toward the lamp to look at the bruise coming up under her eye. "Listen to me," Bess said. "I've kept my mouth shut in this house 19 years. I kept it shut when your mama was alive, and I keep it shut now she's gone. But I'm going to say one true thing to you, and then I'm going to deny I ever said it. You hear, I hear. That man downstairs is not going to stop. Not at a wedding, not at a grandchild, not ever. There is no bottom to what he'll trade to save his own skin, and there never was. And the only thing that changes that Bess's voice dropped so low Evelyn had to lean in. Is you not being here to trade? Evelyn went very still. What are you saying? I'm not saying anything, Bess said, standing gathering the empty plate. I never said a word, but the tack room's never locked and the bay mare knows the north road and the moon's near full 3 nights from now. She moved to the door. A woman who waits to be rescued in this life waits a long time, child. Sometimes the only person coming to save you is the one already standing in your boots. She rapped twice, paused, and was gone. The key turned. Evelyn sat in the dark a long time, and the small, hot, nameless thing in her chest grew a little larger. Silas Crane came to dinner the following night. Evelyn was let out of her room for it escorted down the stairs by her father's hand clamped hard around her upper arm, and she understood the whole arrangement in the first 10 seconds of laying eyes on the man. Crane was near 60. He had a soft, damp handshake and small, pale eyes, and he looked at Evelyn the way a horse trader looks at a mare's teeth, not unkind exactly, but assessing, adding her up, deciding what she was worth against what he was paying. She's prettier than you, said Richard, Crane remarked, before Evelyn had even sat down. He said it about her, not to her, as if she were a piece of furniture her father was trying to move. Younger, too. What is she, 21? 24, Evelyn said. Both men looked at her, faintly surprised she could talk. 24, Crane repeated. He smiled without warmth. Well, not so young a man worries she's got nothing between her ears. Not so old a man worries she's used up. That's a fair age, that's a good age. He picked up his fork. You'll do. You'll do. Evelyn set her hands flat on the table so no one would see them close into fists. Mr. Crane, she said, keeping her voice even. May I ask you a question? Evelyn, her father warned. It's all right, Richard let the girl speak. A wife who can hold a sentence together is worth more than one who can't. Crane spread his hands. Work. Why me? Beg pardon? You're a wealthy man. You could have any young woman in the territory, one with a fortune to match yours, one whose father hasn't lost his whole world at a poker table. So why a bankrupt rancher's daughter with nothing but a bruise on her face? She let the question sit. What is it exactly that you're buying? The room went dead quiet. Crane's pale little eyes moved to Richard, then back to Evelyn, and for just a heartbeat, something flickered behind them. Something calculating. Something that knew more than it should. Then the smile came back down over it like a lid. A wife, Crane said smoothly. A man wants a wife, that's all. But Evelyn had spent 6 years learning to read the exact moment a man was lying to her, and Silas Crane had just lied. Go to your room, her father said. I haven't finished. You've finished. He was already on his feet, already had her arm again, already steering her toward the stairs. His grip would leave marks. Behind them she heard Crane chuckle and murmur something, and she heard her father laugh, a low, oily, relieved sort of laugh she had never once heard from him in her life. Her father did not laugh with relief unless he'd just gotten away with something. She went up the stairs and she filed that laugh away, and the nameless thing in her chest turned its head toward it like an animal scenting smoke. She should have slept. Instead, she lay awake with her ear against the cold plaster of the wall because her room sat directly above her father's study and sound in that old house traveled up through the walls the way water finds a crack. For an hour, there was only the murmur of 2 men and the clink of a bottle. Then near midnight, the words came clear. You can't put me off any longer, Richard. Crane's voice softer now, all the dinner table warmth stripped out of it. You told them 3 months ago you would have it settled. It's not settled, and they are not patient men. It's as good as settled. You saw her. She's healthy. She's young. I don't care if she's healthy. I care that she cancels the debt. That's the arrangement. That's the only arrangement. I take the girl's worth what you owe, and Delacroix's people cross your name off the book. You understand the size of the favor being done for you here. Evelyn stopped breathing. The girl's worth what you owe. I understand, her father said. Do you? Because it seems to me you keep talking about a wedding like it's a wedding. It is not a wedding, Richard. It's a payment. She is a payment. The dress and the guests and the preacher, that's all for the county, so nobody asks the wrong question. But you and I both know what she is. There was a silence, and then her father said the words that broke something in Evelyn that had been holding on far longer than it should have. I know what she is, Richard Whitmore said. She's what I've got left to sell. Evelyn did not cry. She had expected to. Somewhere under the roaring in her ears, she noticed distantly that she did not cry, and she understood why. You cry when something is taken from you that you believe was yours. But she had just learned that she had never been anyone's daughter at all. She had been an asset, a line item, a last card held back in a losing hand for exactly this moment. You don't cry over that. You get up. She got up. She moved through her room in the dark, and her hands were steady. Steady the way they'd been when she looked at the contract, steady in a way that would have terrified her father if he could have seen it. She found the loose floorboard under the window where she'd hidden things since she was 12. Beneath it, $11 in coins saved a penny at a time from the egg money, and her mother's necklace, a thin gold chain, with a small oval locket, the only thing of her mother's that her father hadn't sold or pawned, only because he didn't know it existed. She put the necklace on and buttoned her collar over it. The door was locked, but Bess had said the tack room was never locked, and the moon was near full, and the bay mare knew the North Road, and sometimes the only person coming to save you is the one already standing in your boots. The window then. Evelyn had climbed out of this window once as a girl on a dare from a boy who was long dead now, and she had known even then that her father would have half killed her if he'd caught her. She was heavier now, and the ledge was narrower than she remembered, and the drop to the porch roof looked twice as far in the dark. She sat on the sill, with her legs hanging out into the cold night air, and she thought very clearly, if I fall free. If I stay owned. She jumped. The porch roof took her weight with a groan of old shingles that sounded in the silence like a gunshot. Evelyn froze flat against the slope, every muscle locked, listening. A dog barked once out toward the bunkhouse. A voice cursed at it. The dog went quiet. She breathed again. She worked her way down to the edge, hung by her fingers from the gutter, and dropped the last few feet into the flower bed her mother had planted the summer before she died. Her ankle turned under her, and a bright bolt of pain shot up her leg, but she bit it back and stayed crouched in the dirt, waiting to see if the whole world had heard. The house stayed dark. She ran hunched low toward the black shape of the barn. She was halfway across the yard when the lantern light spilled out of the bunkhouse door. "Who's out there?" Evelyn dropped, flat to the ground cheek in the cold dirt, heart slamming so hard she was certain the man could hear it from 30 feet off. It was Dobbs, one of the hired men her father had brought in to watch the place watch her. He stood in the doorway with a lantern held high and a rifle loose in his other hand, squinting out into the dark. I said, "Who's there?" She did not move. She did not breathe. She thought about the $11 in the necklace, in the bay mare, in the North Road, and she thought not like this. Not caught in the yard like a runaway calf. Not after everything. Dobbs took 2 steps out into the yard. 3. The dog barked again and farther off, and Dobbs turned toward the sound. "Oh, hell," he muttered. "Fool coyote." He spat, hitched up his belt, and went to see about the manning the lantern, swinging away the light sliding off the exact patch of ground where Evelyn lay pressed into the earth. The second his back was turned, she was up and moving. She reached the barn, slipped inside, and there in the warm dark, exactly as Bess had promised, the tack room door hung unlocked, and the bay mare turned her head and made a low welcoming sound at the smell of her. "Shh," Evelyn breathed, hands already finding the bridle. "Shh, girl. We're going, you and me. We're going right now." She led the mare out the back of the barn on foot boots, wrapped in a burlap sack to muffle the hooves. Another of Bess's tricks, she was sure of it, though she'd find out later. Bess had denied ever leaving the sack there at all, and she didn't dare mount up until the buildings were small and dark behind her, and the North Road ran pale under the moon. Then she climbed up and she rode. She rode until the ranch was gone. She rode until the only sound was the mare's breath and the wind and her own heart. And then she rode past that too, because every time she slowed, she heard her father's voice in the wall saying, "She's what I've got left to sell." And the shame and the fury of it drove her on like a spur. She had no plan. That was the truth she wouldn't let herself look at directly. She had $11 and a stolen horse and a dead woman's necklace. And she had no idea where the North Road went, and she had never in her 24 years spent a single night outside the walls of her father's house. But she was not there. For the first time in 6 years, she was not there. Toward dawn, the mare began to tire, and Evelyn's own body caught up with her. All at once, the turned ankle, the bruise on her face, the hours of terror wringing out of her muscles, until her hands shook too hard to hold the reins right. She got down to walk the mare and rest her, and it was then on foot about in the gray half-light that she heard it. Hoofbeats, behind her, on the road, coming fast. Evelyn's whole body went cold. He found me. He sent them. Dobbs saw. They're coming to take me back, and this time there's no window, no roof, no North Road. This time he'll... She looked around wildly for somewhere to hide, and there was nowhere, only the open road and the low brush and the paling sky, and the hoofbeats came on one rider riding hard, and she did the only thing left to do. She turned to face it. She stepped in front of her own tired mare, put herself between the horse and whatever was coming, and she reached down and picked up the biggest rock her shaking hand could find, and she held it, and she thought, I will not go back. If they drag me back, it will be over my body, but I will not go back on my own 2 feet, not ever, not again. The rider crested the low rise and came down toward her, and in the thin light she could see him now. A man alone, tall in the saddle, a long coat and a low hat, and there was a gun on his hip. She could see the gun. Whoa, the rider called, and reined in his horse a good 30 feet off, not closing the distance. Stopping. Easy now, easy. Evelyn didn't lower the rock. Stay back. I'm stopped, the man said. See, I'm stopped right here. He held up one gloved hand open empty. He made no move toward the gun. That's a good-sized rock you got there. I'll use it. I believe you. There was something in his voice, not fear, not mockery, something else, something almost like respect. I surely do believe you. They stood there in the gray dawn, 30 feet of empty road between them, a woman with a rock and a man with a gun he hadn't touched. You're not one of his men, Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. She'd know Dobbs know any of them, and she didn't know this face at all. I don't know whose men you mean, the rider said. But no, I'm nobody's man. Haven't been for a while. He tilted his head, and even under the hat brim, she could see he was looking at her face, at the bruise, at the split lip, at all of it, and something in his jaw tightened. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped, gone quieter and harder. Somebody do that to you? Evelyn's grip on the rock faltered. Nobody had ever asked her that. In 6 years in that whole county, full of people who saw the marks and looked away, not one single soul had ever once asked her that. Why do you care? She said, and hated how her voice cracked on it. The rider was quiet for a moment. My mother had a face like yours once, he said. When I was a boy, she had a face like yours, and a man who put it there, and everybody in the world could see it, and everybody in the world decided it wasn't their business. He shifted in the saddle. I decided a long time ago that if I ever came across it again, it was going to be my business. So, he nodded at her, slow and careful. You can keep the rock. I'll keep my distance. But I'll ask you plain, and you can answer or not what happened to you. And Evelyn Whitmore, who had not cried when she learned her own father meant to sell her, who had not cried climbing out a window, or lying in the dirt, or riding through the dark with no plan and no home and no one. Evelyn stood in the road as the sun came up and felt her eyes fill because a stranger with a gun he wouldn't touch had asked her the one question no one else ever had. She didn't answer him. Not yet. She wasn't ready. But she set the rock down. You got a name? She asked instead. Nathan, the rider said. Nathan Cole Walker. He touched the brim of his hat. And you don't have to tell me yours, not till you want to. The mare shifted behind her. Somewhere far back down the road, so faint she might have imagined it, Evelyn thought she heard other hoofbeats, more than one horse, a lot more still, miles off, but coming, always coming. She looked at the man called Nathan Cole Walker, and she made the second decision of her life. Evelyn, she said, my name is Evelyn. Orchestrated narrative structure, void mini-climax twist, but dialogue-heavy storytelling. Orchestrated narrative structure, void mini-climax twist, but dialogue-heavy storytelling. The name landed between them like a coin dropped on a table. And for a moment, the man called Nathan Cole Walker just looked at her, and Evelyn had the strange feeling he was memorizing it, not the sound of it, but the weight, the way you'd memorize the face of someone you meant to keep track of. Evelyn, he repeated. All right. He didn't tip his hat again, didn't smile, didn't do any of the soft, greasy things men did when they wanted something from a woman. He just nodded once like they'd shaken hands on something. Then here's where we are, Evelyn. You've got a tired horse and a hurt ankle and about $11, I guess, by the way you're standing over that saddlebag like it's the last of the world. And somewhere back down that road, there's men coming who mean to take you somewhere you'd rather die than go. That about the shape of it. She stared at him. How do you know about the $11? I don't. I guessed. You just told me I was right. Something almost like a smile touched the corner of his mouth and was gone. Get on your horse, Evelyn. I don't take orders. No, he agreed. I can see that. It wasn't an order. It was a favor I'm asking because those hoofbeats you're pretending you don't hear are getting closer, and I'd rather not have this conversation with a rope around my neck when they arrive and decide I'm the one who took you. He turned his horse a quarter turn, putting himself sideways to the road between her and the sound. Ride behind me, or ride in front of me, or ride your own direction and never see me again. All three of those are yours to pick, but pick one in the next 10 seconds because they're not slowing down. And that was the thing that undid her. Not the offer, the choice inside the offer. All three of those are yours to pick. No man in her life had ever handed her 3 doors and told her they were all hers. Her father handed her 1 door and locked the rest. Silas Crane hadn't handed her a door at all. She got on her horse. Front or behind, Nathan asked. Behind you, she said, so I can see your hands. He laughed at that, a short surprise bark of a laugh, like it had gotten out before he could stop it, and then they were moving off the road entirely, cutting northwest through the low brush where the ground went hard and rocky and a horse left almost no track at all. She understood watching him pick the line that he wasn't wandering. He knew exactly where the ground would hold a print and where it wouldn't. He rode the rock and skipped the sand, and twice he doubled them back along a dry creek bed for no reason she could see until she realized he was breaking the trail. Anyone following would lose them at the water. You've done this before, she said. Run from men. Yeah. He didn't look back. More than once. They rode hard for the better part of an hour, and the whole time the fear sat behind her breastbone like a swallowed stone, and every time the mare's ears swiveled back, Evelyn's heart climbed into her throat, certain it was Dobbs, certain it was her father, certain the hand was about to close on her collar and drag her home. But no hand came. When at last Nathan slowed them to a walk in the shade of a rocky draw and stepped down to let the horses blow, the road was miles behind them, and the only sound was the wind and the 2 animals breathing. She got down too, and her legs nearly buckled, and Nathan caught her elbow just for a second, just enough, and then let go the instant she had her feet stepping back and to give her the space. She noticed that. She noticed everything about him now, the way a rabbit notices everything about a thing that hasn't eaten it yet. Who are you? She said. I told you, Nathan Cole Walker. That's a name. It isn't an answer. She squared up to him, ankle and all. You break a trail like a man who's being hunted. You carry a gun you didn't touch even when a stranger was throwing rocks at you. You knew there'd be men on that road before I said one word about any men. So I'll ask again, and I'd like the truth because I've had about all the lies I can stomach for one lifetime. Who are you? For a long moment, he didn't answer. He loosened the mare's girth. He checked her tired legs with a hand that was gentle in a way his face wasn't, and then he said, still not looking at her, I used to kill people for money. Evelyn went very still. That's the answer you wanted, he said. There it is. For about 9 years, I was the man other men sent for when they had a problem that walked and talked and wouldn't stop being a problem. I was good at it. I was so good at it that I stopped being able to remember why I'd started. And one day I was standing over a man I'd been paid to put down, and he was somebody's father, and he was begging, and he stopped. His jaw worked. I put my gun away, and I rode off, and I've been riding off ever since. So that's who I am, Evelyn. I'm a man trying to ride far enough that the man I used to be can't catch up. That good enough for you, or you want me to keep going till you're sorry you asked? She should have been afraid. Any sane woman would have been afraid. But Evelyn had spent 6 years in a house with a man who smiled at his supper guests and hid his daughter behind closed doors, and she had learned that the ones who told you plainly what they were never the ones you needed to fear. It was the ones who lied about it. You could have told me you were a rancher, she said quietly, or a preacher, or anything. I'd never have known the difference. No, he agreed, you wouldn't have. So why tell me the worst thing about yourself in the first hour? He looked at her then full on, and something in his face was so tired and so honest that it made her chest ache. Because you're going to have to trust somebody, he said. And I'd rather you trust me knowing what I am than not knowing. A woman like you gets fooled once by a man who hid what he was. I won't be the second one." He straightened. "Now, you gonna tell me who's chasing you, or do I have to keep guessing?" So she told him. She told him about her father and the ranch he'd gambled into the ground. She told him about the marriage contract with her name on it, like a bill of sale, and about Silas Crane and his damp little eyes, and the way he'd said, "You'll do." And then because she'd started and couldn't stop, she told him the thing she hadn't said out loud even to herself, the words she'd heard through the wall. "He said I was a payment," she said, and her voice finally cracked wide open. "Not a bride, a payment. He owed money to some men, and I was what he had left to sell to make it go away. My own father. He said it like he was talking about cattle. She's what I've got left to sell." Nathan had gone very still while she spoke. And when she said the last part, when she got to the part about the debt, about the men, she watched something change in his face. It wasn't sympathy. It was recognition. It was the face of a man who has just heard a name he hoped never to hear again. "These men your father owes," Nathan said, and his voice had gone flat and careful. "You catch a name. One." Crane said it. She frowned, reaching for it. "Delacroix. He said Delacroix's people would cross my father's name off the book." The name went through Nathan Cole Walker like a blade. She saw it happen. She saw the color leave his face and his hand drift without his seeming to know it toward the gun on his hip, the gun he hadn't touched even when she was throwing rocks at his head. He caught himself, made the hand into a fist, and let it drop. But she had seen it, and she understood with a cold drop in her stomach that she had just stumbled into something far bigger and far older than her own small nightmare. "You know him," she said. "You know that name." "Get on your horse," Nathan said. "Nathan, get on your horse, Evelyn." All the softness was gone. "There's a town 2 hours north called Red Hollow. It's small and it's ornery and it minds its own business." "Which is exactly what you need right now. We're going there and we're going now, and I'll tell you what you need to know when you need to know it and not 1 minute before, because right now the less you know about Etienne Delacroix, the safer you are, and I mean that." He swung up into his saddle. "Ride." And there it was again, an order dressed as protection. But this time she didn't argue because she had seen his face when she said that name, and whatever Etienne Delacroix was, it had put fear into a man who used to kill people for a living. She rode. They came into Red Hollow near noon, and the town was exactly as he'd promised, small, dusty ornery, the kind of place where a stranger got looked at once hard and then left alone. Nathan took them straight to a mercantile with a hand-painted sign that read, "Hayes Dry Goods and Sundries," and he swung down and tied both horses and said, "Wait here," and went inside, and Evelyn, who did not wait for anyone anymore, got down and followed him. Inside, a woman was arguing with a delivery man over a crate of nails. She was maybe 50, built like a fence post with iron gray hair scraped back into a knot and a pair of spectacles pushed up on her forehead, and she was pointing at the crate and saying, "And if you think I'm paying full freight on nails that are half rust, you've got another thing coming, and you can tell Pearson I said so, and you can tell him I've got a good long memory and an even longer ledger." She looked up, saw Nathan, and her whole face changed. "Well, I'll be. Nathan Walker, I heard you were dead." "I heard that too," Nathan said. "Turned out to be exaggerated. Usually is with you." Her sharp eyes cut past him to Evelyn, and Evelyn watched the woman take her in all at once, the bruise, the split lip, the dirt, the exhaustion, the way she stood like something braced against a wind. The delivery man opened his mouth to keep arguing, and Margaret Hayes said, "Out Foley, come back when Pearson's ready to talk honest," and shoved him toward the door, and the second he was gone, she came around the counter and stood in front of Evelyn, and said gentler than anything that hard face looked capable of, "Who did that to you, child?" And Evelyn, who had been asked that same question by exactly one other person in her whole life a few hours ago on a road at dawn, felt her throat close. "My father," she said. Margaret Hayes looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked at Nathan. Then she looked back at Evelyn and she said, "You hungry?" Evelyn nodded. "You got anywhere to be?" Evelyn shook her head. "Good," said Margaret Hayes. "Then you're staying. There's a room off the back I've been meaning to fill, and a stack of inventory I've been meaning to count. And I don't do charity, so you'll earn your keep, but you'll have a lock on the inside of your own door, and nobody in this town gets past me to bother you. That suit. Evelyn opened her mouth to say something, thank you or I can't, or why would you do this? And what came out instead to her own shock was a sob she'd been holding since the study wall, since the necklace, since the window, since the road. It just broke out of her all at once. And Margaret Hayes, who did not do charity, put her arms around a stranger's daughter and held on tight and said nothing at all. And over the woman's shoulder, Evelyn saw Nathan quietly step outside to give them the room, and she thought maybe there's a world that isn't the one I grew up in. Maybe I just haven't seen it until now. She should have known it wouldn't be that easy. The first 3 days in Red Hollow were the strangest of Evelyn's life because for the first time, she could remember no one was afraid of her father because no one knew who her father was. She counted inventory. She swept the floor. She learned the ledger, and it turned out she was good at it, better than good. She caught 2 errors in the accounts that Margaret had been chasing for a month, and when she pointed them out, the older woman took off her spectacles and stared at her and said, "Where in God's name did a rancher's daughter learn to read a double-entry ledger?" "I taught myself," Evelyn said. "My father wouldn't pay for a bookkeeper, so somebody had to do it, and it turned out to be me. He never knew. He thought numbers were beneath a woman." She almost smiled. "He used to say I hadn't got the head for anything but marrying." "Your father," said Margaret Hayes, "is a fool, and I've met a lot of fools." She put her spectacles back on. "You've got the head for plenty, girl. The trick's going to be believing it before somebody talks you back out of it." And that was the thing that started to change in Evelyn over those 3 days. Not safety exactly, because she still jumped at every rider who came through, still slept with the lock thrown and a fire iron by the bed. It was something smaller and more dangerous than safety. It was the beginning of believing she was worth something on her own account, that she was capable, that the woman her father had spent 6 years telling her she was helpless, stupid, fit for nothing but being handed to a man might have been a lie all along, told by a man who needed her to believe it so he could sell her when the time came. That belief was the most fragile thing she owned, and her father was about to try to shatter it in front of the whole town. It began with a stranger. He came into the Mercantile on the 4th afternoon, a lean man in a good coat with a way of standing that Evelyn recognized instantly, because Dobbs stood that way, because all her father's hired men stood that way, like the room belonged to them, and everyone in it was in their light. He didn't buy anything. He looked at the goods, and he looked at Margaret, and then too long he looked at Evelyn. "Help you," Margaret said in a voice like a closing door. "Looking for somebody," the man said. "Young woman, yellow hair. Might have come through, recent might be traveling with a man." His eyes hadn't left Evelyn. Family's real worried about her. There's money for word of where she's at. Evelyn's hands went cold on the ledger. "Lots of young women in the world," Margaret said. "Lots of yellow hair. You'll want it to be more specific, or you'll want to buy something, or you'll want to leave, and I don't much care which." The man smiled slow. "She'd have a mark on her. Bruise, maybe. Her people say she's not right in the head. Ran off from a good home, tells stories, needs looking after." He tipped his hat at Evelyn directly. "Anybody like that come through, ma'am." And Evelyn understood in that moment exactly what her father had done. He hadn't come after her with a rope because a rope would raise questions. He'd come after her with a story. She's not right in the head. She ran off. She tells stories. He was going to take back not just her body, but her word, make it so that anything she said about him, about Crane, about the debt, about being sold, would sound like the ravings of a girl who'd lost her mind. He was going to steal her sanity out from under her before she ever got the chance to use her voice. "I haven't seen anyone like that," Evelyn heard herself say. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that later. "But if she ran off from a good home, mister, maybe it wasn't so good." The man's smile flickered. He looked at her a beat longer than was comfortable, and then he touched his hat again and walked out and through the window. Evelyn watched him mount a horse and ride not out of town, but toward its center, toward the telegraph office. And she knew the way. You know, a storm before it breaks? That a message was about to go down a wire, and that within a day, maybe 2, her father would be standing in this town. "Margaret," she said. "I heard him." Margaret was already moving, already flipping the sign on the door to closed. "That the kind of thing your father does. That's exactly the kind of thing my father does." "Then we've got some talking to do, and we'd best do it before Walker gets back, because that man's got a way of deciding things for people, And I have a feeling this is your decision to make. Margaret sat her down at the counter. Now, you listen to me. That fella's going to send word. Your daddy's going to come. When he does, he's going to stand in the middle of my town and tell everyone in it that you're a poor sick girl who got led astray, and he's going to do it real sorrowful and real convincing, because men like that are always convincing. That's how they get to be men like that. And this whole town's going to be standing there watching to see what you do. She leaned in. So the only question that matters is this one. When he tells that story, are you going to stand there and let him tell it, or are you going to open your mouth? Evelyn's whole body wanted to say, I'll run. Every instinct she owned, every muscle trained by 6 years of surviving, screamed, run, run again, run further. Don't stand there and let him get his hands on your name. But somewhere underneath the fear was that other thing, the fragile new thing, the thing that had caught 2 errors in a ledger and heard Margaret Hayes say, you've got the head for plenty. And that thing said very quietly, if you run now, you'll run forever. He'll always be behind you. There is no North Road long enough. The only way out is through him. I'll open my mouth, Evelyn said. Margaret sat back and looked at her with something that was almost pride. Well, she said, all right then. The door rattled. Nathan came in, saw the closed signs, saw their faces, and stopped cold. What happened? My father found me, Evelyn said. Or he's about to. A man came asking. He's telling people that I'm sick in the head, that I ran off and I tell stories. She lifted her chin. He's going to come here and try to take me back and make everyone believe I'm crazy, so nobody listens to a word I say about him. She expected Nathan to react the way Margaret had grim ready planning. Instead, something worse happened. Nathan went pale the way he'd gone pale on the road when she said the name Delacroix, and he said low and urgent, the man who came asking, describe him. Lean good coat stands like he owns the floor. Yes, all of that. Why? Nathan crossed to the window and looked out at the empty street for a long moment, and when he turned back around, his face had changed into something Evelyn hadn't seen on it before. Not the tired honesty of the man on the road, but something older and harder and colder, the face she realized of the man he used to be, the one he'd been trying to outrun. That's not one of your father's ranch hands, Nathan said. That's not some hired local muscle your father scraped up. I know that man, Evelyn. His name is Pruitt, and he doesn't work for broke ranchers. He drew a breath. He works for Delacroix. The floor seemed to tilt under her. But my father, the debt. Your father didn't just borrow money from dangerous men, Nathan said. He borrowed money from the dangerous man. And that changes everything, because it means this was never really about a wedding, and it was never really about you being a payment. Crane's just a middleman. Your father's just a debtor. The person who actually wants you delivered is a man who does not lose things he's decided he owns, and who has been looking for a reason to come north for a long, long time. Nathan's jaw tightened. And now his people have found you in Red Hollow, standing next to me. Why does it matter that I'm standing next to you? Evelyn demanded. What did you do, Nathan? Who are you to these people? And Nathan Cole Walker looked at her and looked at Margaret and looked back at her and said the thing that turned the whole story over like a card. The last job I ever did, the man I was standing over, the one who was begging. The one who was somebody's father, the reason I put my gun away and rode off and never took another dollar. He swallowed. That man was Etienne Delacroix's brother. I was supposed to kill him. I didn't. I let him live, and I walked away, and Delacroix has wanted my head for 6 years for it. He never knew where I went. His voice dropped to almost nothing. Until now. Until his man Pruitt walked into the store and saw me standing behind you. For a moment, none of them spoke. So let me be sure I've got this straight, Margaret Hayes said slowly. This poor girl runs from a father who sold her to pay a debt. And the man she happens to run into on the road, the one man in 1,000 miles who stops to help her, is the one man in the world her father's creditor most wants dead. She took off her spectacles and rubbed her eyes. That's not luck. That's not coincidence. That's the devil laughing is what that is. It isn't coincidence, Nathan said quietly, and something in the way he said it made Evelyn's skin go cold. I don't think it is anyway. I've been trying to figure it since she said the name on the road, and I keep landing in the same place, and I don't like where it lands. He looked at Evelyn. Your father owes Delacroix. Delacroix wants me, And your father's been telling everyone his daughter got taken by a dangerous man. He let that sit. You see it yet? Evelyn saw it. God help her, she saw it, and it was so ugly she almost couldn't say it out loud. He's going to say you took me, she whispered. My father. He's going to stand in that street and tell everyone I was kidnapped by a killer. And he'll be describing you. And Delacroix will have his men in the crowd. And the whole town will help hunt you down thinking they're rescuing me and hand you straight to the one man who wants you dead. She pressed her hand to her mouth. He gets his daughter back. He pays his debt with you instead of with me, and Delacroix gets his revenge. Everybody wins but us. My father figured out how to sell me and you in the same stroke. The silence after that was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. Huh, said Margaret Hayes very softly. The girl's got the head for plenty after all. Nathan was staring at Evelyn with something that was almost awe and almost grief. I've known men who plotted for a living, he said, who couldn't have laid it out that clean. You got all that from one look at Pruitt's coat. I got all of that from 24 years of watching my father, Evelyn said. Figure out how to turn every single thing that happened to him into somebody else's fault and his own gain. She was shaking now, but not with fear, with fury, with the pure white fury of finally seeing the whole shape of the thing that had been done to her. He's not smart, Nathan. He's just cruel and he's had a lot of practice. And he's coming here to take everything from me all over again. My freedom, my name, my sanity, and now you. She wiped her eyes hard with the back of her hand. And I am so tired of that man taking things. Nathan crossed the room. He stopped a careful arm's length away the way he always did, giving her the space, and he said, Then here's what I want you to hear, and I want you to hear it plain, because I don't say things I don't mean. I can be gone by dark. Pruitt saw me, but he doesn't know I've made him. I could take a horse and ride, and Delacroix would chase me and leave you be, and you'd be safe here with Margaret, and your father'd have no killer to point at, and the story falls apart. He held her eyes. I'd do that. Right now. If it kept you clear of this, just say the word and I'm a ghost by sundown. And Evelyn understood that he meant it. That was the terrible, wonderful thing about him. He meant it. He would ride off into the guns of a man who wanted him dead alone to keep her out of it, and he'd do it without asking for one single thing in return. No man had ever offered her anything without a price attached. Her father hadn't. Crane hadn't. And here was a former killer offering to walk into his own death for her and calling it a favor she could refuse. No, Evelyn said. No, I said no. She lifted her chin and her voice came out steadier than she felt steady the way it had come out, staring at the contract, steady in a way she was starting to understand was simply what she sounded like when she'd finally decided something. For 6 years, I let a man make my choices for me because I believed I couldn't make my own. I'm not going to spend my first week of freedom letting a good man do it instead. You don't get to ride off and die for me to make things simple. That's not your decision. It's mine, and I've made it. She looked from Nathan to Margaret and back. He's coming here to tell a story about me, so we're going to be here. And when he tells it, I'm going to tell the truth in front of everyone before Delacroix's men can turn it into a manhunt. If the whole town's going to be standing there anyway. Her voice caught, then steadied. Then let them stand there and hear what my father actually is. Margaret Hayes let out a low whistle. Nathan just looked at her, and for the first time since the road, he smiled, a real one, slow and full, that changed his whole tired face. You know, he said, when I found you on that road, I thought I was the one saving you. You were wrong, Evelyn said. Yeah, said Nathan Cole Walker. I'm starting to see that. They didn't have long to wait. Word travels fast on a wire and faster on the road behind it, and it was the very next afternoon Evelyn was at the counter ledger open when she heard it the sound of horses, more than a few, coming into Red Hollow, at a walk, the walk of men who wanted to be seen coming. She went to the window, and there at the head of maybe 6 riders sitting his horse, like a man arriving to reclaim something that had been stolen from him, was Richard Whitmore. Her father had dressed for it. That was the first thing she noticed, and it turned her stomach. He'd put on his good coat, the Sunday one, the one he wore, to look respectable in front of people who mattered. He'd shaved. He looked to anyone who didn't know him like a grieving father who'd ridden a long, hard way to find his lost child. And riding just off his shoulder, lean and easy in a good coat of his own, was Pruitt. The street was filling. People came out of the feed store and the saloon, and the barbers drawn by the horses by the strangers, by the particular electricity of trouble arriving. Margaret came and stood at Evelyn's shoulder. Somewhere behind them, quiet Nathan said, "You don't have to do this. It's not too late to walk out the back." "Yes, I do," Evelyn said. "And no, it isn't." She closed the ledger. Her hands were steady. "Stay inside until I say. If they see you first, it becomes about you, and it can't be about you. It has to be about him." She drew a breath that shook only a little. "It has to be about what he did to me." And Evelyn Whitmore, 24 years old with a fading bruise on her cheek, and $11 to her name, and a dead mother's necklace under her collar, walked out the front door of Hayes Dry Goods and into the middle of the street to face the man who had owned her for her entire life. Richard saw her, and his whole face rearranged itself in an instant, from the hard-traveling scowl to something soft and stricken and heartbroken so fast and so complete that anyone watching would have sworn it was real. "Evelyn," he said, and his voice cracked on. It actually cracked, the practiced grief of a man who'd been lying his whole life. He got down off his horse. "Oh, thank God, thank God. We've been searching everywhere. Your poor—" He pressed a hand to his chest. "Your poor mine girl, you had us so frightened." "Don't," Evelyn said. The street had gone quiet. Every face in Red Hollow was turned toward them. "Sweetheart, you're not well," Richard said, gentle moving toward her, with his hands spread, playing to the crowd, playing every soul on that street. "You've been telling stories again. You ran off in the night with a strange man, and I have been out of my mind." "I said don't." Her voice rang off the storefronts. It did not shake. "You want to talk, Papa? Fine. Let's talk. Right here. In front of all these people. Let's tell them the whole story." She took a step toward him, and it was her stepping toward him, not him toward her, and she saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes, the first crack in the performance. "Let's start with the contract. Go on. Tell them the name of the man you sold me to. Tell them how much I was worth." Richard's mouth opened. For just a heartbeat, one single heartbeat, the loving father slipped, and the thing underneath looked out at her with pure, cold hatred. And Evelyn saw it, and she knew the whole town would have seen it too, if they'd known where to look. But they didn't know, not yet. And her father, professional to the bone, wrestled the mask back into place. "You see," he said, turning to the crowd now, sorrowful, spreading his hands wide. "You see how she is stories, always stories. A father tries to protect his sick child, and this is what—" "Tell them about Delacroix," Evelyn said. And the whole street went silent in a different way, the way a room goes silent when a name is spoken, that some of the people in it recognize and wish they hadn't. Off to the side, near the mouth of an alley, Evelyn saw Pruitt go very still in his saddle, and she saw her father's face lose every scrap of its color all at once, the mask cracking clean down the middle. "I don't know what you're—" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," Evelyn said, and now the tears were coming. But her voice held God, her voice held like iron. "You owe Etienne Delacroix money you can't pay, and you decided the way to pay it was to hand him your own daughter like a sack of grain. And when I ran, you couldn't just come get me because that would mean admitting what you'd done, so you made up a story about a crazy girl and a dangerous man, and you rode all the way up here to tell it, and you brought Delacroix's man with you." She flung her arm toward the alley toward Pruitt, "So you could sell me and settle your own neck in the same breath." Her voice broke at last, but she didn't stop. She would not stop. "You didn't come to save me, Papa. You never once in your whole life came to save me. You came to collect me, and I am not a thing that can be collected." The silence after that was total. Richard Whitmore stood in the middle of the street with 6 of the town watching, and his mask in pieces on the ground between them. And for the first time in Evelyn's entire life, she watched her father have absolutely nothing to say. And then, slow from the mouth of the alley, Pruitt began to move his horse forward, and his good coat fell open just enough for Evelyn to see the gun beneath it. And she understood that the talking part was over, and that whatever came next was going to be settled some other way. Pruitt's horse came 3 steps into the street before Nathan's voice stopped it. "That's far enough, Isaac." Nathan had come out of the mercantile without a sound, and he stood now on the boardwalk with his coat pushed back and his hand hanging loose and easy beside the gun he still had not drawn, and the whole street felt the temperature drop. Pruitt reined in, his face when he saw who'd spoken did something complicated surprise, then a slow, ugly satisfaction, the look of a man who has been hunting a long time and just walked into his quarry by pure dumb luck. Well, I'll be damned, Pruitt said softly. Nathan Cole Walker, in the flesh. Mr. Delacroix is going to want to hear about this. He's going to want to hear about this real bad. I imagine he is, Nathan said. You send that wire yet, or were you waiting to be sure? Waiting to be sure. Pruitt smiled. I'm sure now. Then we've got a little time before company arrives, Nathan said, and I'd use it thinking hard if I were you about whether you want to be the man who started shooting on a public street in front of 40 witnesses over a debt that isn't even yours. And that was when Richard Whitmore, who had been standing frozen with his mask in pieces, saw his chance to grab the story back because a father's grief was ruined, but a father's rescue might still play, and he flung out his arm at Nathan and cried to the whole street, "That's him. That's the man who took her. You all heard my daughter's confused. You all can see she's not right. That killer's been filling her head with lies, turning her against her own blood. Somebody get the marshal. Somebody." "There's no marshal in Red Hollow," Margaret Hayes said. She'd come out onto the boardwalk to stand beside Nathan, arms folded, spectacles down on her nose, and she said it flat and loud to everyone. "Haven't had one in 2 years, Richard Whitmore, and don't you go pretending you don't know that, because a man doesn't ride 4 days to a town he's never scouted. You knew there was no law here. That's why you came here. You picked a town with no marshal to do your collecting in, and you brought your own gun to do it." She jabbed a finger at Pruitt, "And you dressed it up as saving your little girl. I've run this store 30 years. I know a swindle when it rides into my street wearing a Sunday coat." A murmur went through the crowd. Evelyn heard it. It was the sound of 40 people beginning to look at her father differently, and it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "Who are you?" Richard snarled, too. "I'm the woman whose store your daughters have been sleeping behind for a week," Margaret said, "keeping honest accounts and catching errors. Your fine bookkeeper never could, which is a funny thing for a girl who's supposedly out of her mind." She looked around at the crowd. "You all know me. Have I ever once lied to a one of you, sold you a bad bolt of cloth and called it good no? So believe me now, that girl's got more sense in her than her father's got in his whole body. And everything she just said in this street is true. And every one of you knows in your gut it's true because you've all seen that particular kind of man before." "Margaret," Evelyn said quietly, and the older woman glanced at her, and Evelyn shook her head just slightly. "Not yet. Let me," and stepped forward again herself, because Margaret was right that the town needed to hear it. But Evelyn knew it couldn't come from Margaret. It had to come from her. It had always had to come from her. "You want proof," Evelyn said to her father. "You've been telling everyone I make up stories. So let's not have a story. Let's have proof." And she reached into the pocket of her apron and she drew out a folded paper and she held it up so the street could see it. "This is the marriage contract in his hand, with his signature, selling me to Silas Crane for a sum that's written right here at the bottom." Her voice rose. "A man doesn't put a price on his daughter's wedding, does he? A dowry goes the other way. But this," she unfolded it, turned it out to the crowd, "this says the money comes to him. Read it yourselves. That's not a wedding. That's a receipt. She'd taken it. That was the thing none of them had known. Not Nathan, not Margaret, not her father. In the last frantic minutes before she climbed out the window, she had gone back down the loose floorboard for the coins and the necklace, and she had also, on some instinct she couldn't have named, crept to the study while her father slept off his whiskey and taken the contract out of the drawer where he kept it, because even then, even terrified, some part of her had known, the day is coming when your word won't be enough. Take the thing they can't call a story. Richard lunged for it. He came off the ground and across the space between them faster than a man his size should move. Hand out for the paper, and Evelyn snatched it back, and Nathan was already moving, and Pruitt's gun was already clearing his coat. And it was Margaret Hayes of all people who fired first, a small pistol appearing from her apron, in a single shot cracking into the dirt a foot in front of Pruitt's horse, and the animal screamed and reared, and Pruitt fought it, and the whole street exploded into chaos and shouting. "Nobody," Margaret bellowed, "moves Isaac Pruitt. You put that hand back where I can see it, or the next one goes in your horse and then in you, and don't think I'll feel bad about either. I've buried 2 husbands and cried over neither." Her voice cut through the panic like a blade. Richard Whitmore, you take one more step toward that girl, and I will personally see you can't take steps anymore. This is my town and my street, and you came into it looking to collect a human being, and you are going to find out that this is the wrong town for that. The street held its breath. Pruitt slowly put his hand back on his saddle horn. Richard stood frozen, chest heaving, the contract still in his daughter's raised fist, and 40 townspeople between him and her, and every single one of them now looking at him like the thing to be watched. He'd lost the street. Evelyn saw the exact moment he understood it, and she watched him do the thing she had watched him do her whole life. She watched him decide that if he couldn't win the game he was playing, he would flip the whole table over. "Fine," Richard Whitmore said, and his voice changed. The grief was gone, the sorrow was gone, even the anger was gone, and what was left was flat and cold and businesslike. And it was Evelyn realized the truest thing he'd said in the whole street. "You want the truth in front of everybody. Have it. Yes, I sold her. I owe money to men who kill people who don't pay, and I don't have it, and she was what I had, and I did what any man in a corner would do." He looked around at the shocked faces with contempt. "Don't any of you look at me like that. You'd have done the same. You just never had to find out." His eyes came back to Evelyn, and there was something almost like curiosity in them, cold as a snake's. "But here's what you don't know, girl, what you couldn't know, because you think you ran from me. You think you're standing here free." He smiled, and it was the worst thing she'd ever seen on his face. "You didn't run from anything. I let you run." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "Delacroix didn't want a wife delivered," Richard said. "Delacroix wanted a lure. He's been hunting a man for 6 years, a man who crossed him, who was supposed to kill his brother, and didn't, and he could never find him, because the man's a ghost, because the man's careful. So Delacroix's people put word out quiet all through the territory. Any man's that got a young woman in trouble, a woman on the run, send her running our direction. Because a certain kind of man," his eyes slid to Nathan, "a certain kind of former kind of man can't help himself, can't ride past a woman with a bruise on her face. It's the one crack in him. It's the one thing that'll draw him out into the open after 6 years of hiding." Richard's smile widened. "So no, I didn't just sell you to pay my debt. I sold you as bait, and you ran exactly the way you were supposed to, right into the arms of exactly the man they wanted, and you led him right here into the open, and Pruitt's already sent the wire." He spread his hands wide, almost gentle. "It's already done, sweetheart. You were the trap. You've been the trap since the night you climbed out that window, thinking it was your own idea." The silence that followed was the worst silence of Evelyn's life. Because it fit. That was the horror of it. It fit every piece. The unlocked tack room, the burlap sack she'd been so sure Bess left that Bess had denied leaving. The bay mare that knew the North Road. The way the one man on that road at dawn had been the exact man Delacroix wanted. Not coincidence. Not the devil laughing. A machine. A machine her father had built and set in motion, and she had walked through every gear of it, believing each step was her own free choice, and at the center of the machine waiting was Nathan. She turned to look at him, and what she saw in his face nearly killed her because Nathan wasn't looking at her father. He was looking at her, and there was no anger in it at all, only a terrible, gentle, unsurprised grief. The look of a man hearing something he'd already half figured out and hoped to God he was wrong about. "You knew," she whispered. "On the road, when I said Delacroix's name and you went white, you already suspected, didn't you? That's why you asked if it was coincidence. You thought I might be—" "No." Nathan crossed to her fast, and for the first time he didn't stop at arm's length. He took her by both shoulders and made her look at him. "Listen to me. Listen. Yes, I wondered. The second you said that name, I wondered if somebody sent you. I've stayed alive 6 years by wondering about everything." His hands tightened. "And you know what I decided standing on that road? I decided I did not care. I decided that even if you were bait, even if there was a hook in you and a line running all the way back to Delacroix's hand, you were still a woman alone on a road with your father's marks on your face, and I was still not going to ride past you." His voice was fierce and low and only for her. "He's right about one thing, Evelyn. It is the one crack in me. I can't ride past, but that crack isn't a weakness he found. It's the only part of me the killing never got to. It's the one thing I've got left that's still worth a damn. And he can use it to catch me, and I still wouldn't trade it because a man who could ride past you isn't a man I'd want to be alive to be. Evelyn's eyes were streaming. But now they're coming because of me. Delacroix's coming because I led them right to... You didn't lead them anywhere. Nathan gave her a small shake. You hear your father? You've been the trap since you climbed out that window. He wants you to believe that. He wants you to believe you don't have one single choice that was ever really yours, because that's the last thing he's got to sell your own free will right back to you, secondhand and broken. Don't buy it. Don't you dare buy it. He held her eyes. Maybe he pointed you at a road. Maybe the tack room was open on purpose. But you're the one who jumped out that window. You're the one who faced me down with a rock. You're the one who stood in the street just now and put his whole game in pieces on the ground. Bait doesn't do that, Evelyn. Bait doesn't fight. You stopped being his trap the second you started making choices he didn't plan for, and he's been chasing you ever since because he lost control of you, not because he's still got it. And something in Evelyn hearing that straightened, because it was true. If she'd truly been nothing but a lure running on rails, her father would never have needed to ride 4 days and put on his Sunday coat and lie to a whole town. You don't chase a thing that's doing exactly what you built it to do. He was here because she'd broken loose. He was here because the machine had thrown a gear the moment she took the contract instead of just her mother's necklace. The moment she said, you'll have to hit me harder than that. The moment she actually chose Nathan behind her instead of in front. The trap had a mind, and the mind had said no, and that was the one variable her father had never once accounted for in 24 years, because he'd spent all of them making sure she'd never have one. Delacroix's coming, she said, and her voice had gone steady again. How long? Wire went this morning, Nathan said. He's got men in Placer Junction, day and a half's ride. If he comes himself, and for me, he'll come himself. His jaw set. We've got maybe 2 days, less. Then 2 days is what we've got. Evelyn turned to face the street, the whole watching town, and she lifted the contract again, and she raised her voice so it carried to the last man at the back. You all just heard him. You heard my father say it in his own words. He sold me to pay a debt to a man who kills people, and he used me to bait a trap, and that trap's about to come riding into your town with guns because of a debt that was never yours and a grudge that was never yours. She let it land. Now I'm a stranger here. I've got no claim on any of you. So you can do what most towns do, which is shut your doors and hope it passes and let it fall on whoever it falls on. That's the safe thing. Nobody blame you. She drew a breath. Or you can decide right now that you don't want to be the kind of town where a man can ride in and buy a person and nobody stands up. Because that's the real question my father brought into your street today. It was never really about me. It's about whether there's anywhere left in this whole territory where a human being isn't for sale. Nobody spoke. For a long, terrible moment, nobody spoke, and Evelyn thought she'd lost them, thought she'd asked 40 strangers to die, for a woman they'd known a week, and of course they wouldn't, of course. My brother owed money once, a man said. It was the blacksmith, a huge, quiet man Evelyn had seen but never spoken to, and he said it slow, like the words cost him. To men like that, down in Texas, and when he couldn't pay, they took his girl for it, and the whole town watched and did just exactly what you said, shut their doors and hoped it'd pass. He looked at his own hands. I've hated myself 20 years for standing in that street and doing nothing. I've thought about it every single day. He raised his head. I ain't standing in another one. And then Margaret Hayes said, you know I'm in. I fired the first shot already. And there was a scatter of grim laughter, and then the feed store man said, hell, I never liked strangers riding in like they own the place anyhow. And then more voices and more. And Evelyn stood in the middle of a street that a week ago hadn't known her name and watched it decide one hard voice at a time to stand between her and the men who'd come to collect. Her father watched it too, and Evelyn saw on his face the thing he could not understand, would never understand, the thing that had been the flaw in his whole design from the start. He had built his entire plan on the certainty that his daughter was worthless and alone, and that no one would ever stand up for a thing that could be bought. And he'd been wrong. He'd been wrong about her, and now he was watching a whole town prove it, and it broke something in him, Not his heart, he didn't have one for it to break, but his certainty, the bedrock arrogance that had let him treat her like property for 24 years. You're all fools, he said, but it came out weak. Maybe, Margaret said, but we're fools with a store, a smithy, a full water tank, and every rifle in a 40-mile radius, and you're a broke man with a hired gun and a debt coming due. So, she gestured at his horse. Get on. Ride out to meet Delacroix or ride off to hide from him. I don't care which, but get out of my street. Your daughter's not for sale here. Nothing is. And Richard Whitmore, beaten in a public street for the first time in his life, looked one last time at his daughter, and Evelyn braced for the hatred for one last cruelty, flung like a stone. But that wasn't what came. What came was worse. What came was a look almost of bewilderment, a man staring at a possession that had turned out to be a person, and he said quietly, only to her, I don't understand what you are. No, Evelyn said, you never did. That was always the problem. He got on his horse. Pruitt fell in beside him, and at the edge of town, Pruitt turned in his saddle and pointed two fingers at Nathan like the barrel of a gun, a promise, and then they were gone north toward Placer Junction, toward Delacroix. And the second they were out of sight, the street erupted. Everyone talking at once, the fear crashing back in. Now that the performance of courage was over, and Evelyn felt her own legs finally start to go, and it was Nathan who caught her, and this time he didn't let go at arm's length. This time he held her up and she let him, and she pressed her face into his shoulder in the middle of the street and shook. You did that? Nathan said against her hair. You, not me, not Margaret. You walked out that door with a piece of paper and you turned a whole town. You know how many men with guns couldn't do what you just did with your voice? I'm so scared, she whispered. I said all those brave things and I'm so scared. Nathan, he's coming, and it's my fault they're all. It's not your fault. He pulled back to look at her. But you're right to be scared because I'm not going to lie to you and I never will. Delacroix is coming and men are going to get hurt, and I can't promise you it comes out clean. What I can promise you, he took her face in his hands gentle, the way you'd hold something you were afraid of breaking, and this was the closest they had ever been, is that I am not going to ride off and leave you to it. Your father said I was drawn here by the one crack in me. He's wrong about that too. I stayed for the crack. I'm here now for you. Those are different things, and somewhere in the last week they got different, and I'm too old and too tired to pretend they didn't. His thumb brushed the fading bruise on her cheeks so lightly it was hardly a touch. So we're going to get ready, and when he comes, he's going to find out what I already found out on that road at dawn. That you are the single most dangerous thing in this whole territory to a man who thinks people can be owned. Evelyn looked up at him, at the tired, honest face of a man who used to kill people and had ridden 1,000 miles trying to become someone else and had stopped running for the first time in 6 years to stand in a doomed little town beside a woman he'd known a week. Nathan, she said, yeah. Before Delacroix gets here, before any of it. She swallowed. I need to tell you something, and I need you to not say anything back because if you say something back, I'll lose my nerve. All right. All right. My whole life. Evelyn said every single person who ever said they wanted me for something. My father wanted me to sell. Crane wanted me to settle a debt. Even the men who were supposed to love me, I was always a thing that was for something. And then you rode up on that road and you asked me what happened to me, and you weren't asking so you could use it. You just wanted to know. Her voice broke. Do you have any idea what that does to a person who's never once had it, to just be asked, to just be wanted to be known instead of wanted to be had? She wiped her face hard. I don't know what this is, what's happening between us. I don't have a word for it because I've never had the thing that gets the word. But whatever it is, it's the first thing in my whole life that was mine because I chose it and not because somebody put a price on it. And I needed to say that out loud once before those men come in case she stopped. In case there isn't a later to say it in. For a long moment, Nathan didn't answer, holding to his promise not to. And then he broke it because some promises are made to be broken. And he said low and rough, there's going to be a later. I've spent 6 years running from my own past, Evelyn, and I would have kept running the rest of my life. And you're the first thing that ever made me want to stop and build something instead of just get away from something. That's not a small thing. That's the whole thing. He rested his forehead against hers. So there's going to be a later. I'll make sure of it, even if I have to walk out into every gun Delacroix owns to buy it. Don't, she whispered, don't you dare buy me a later with your life. I'm done with people trading themselves for me. Then we'll buy it together, he said, standing up, both of us. That's the only way I'll take it. And that would have been the moment, that would have been the whole tender heart of it, except that Margaret Hayes came out onto the boardwalk with a face like a thundercloud and a strip of yellow paper in her fist and said, Nathan, you'd best come read this. What is it? Boy from the telegraph office just brought it. Says a wire came in an hour ago before all this and he was too scared of the strangers to hand it over till they'd gone. She held it out and her hand, Evelyn saw, was not quite steady. It's not from Placer Junction, Nathan. Delacroix's not a day and a half out. Nathan took the paper. Read it. And Evelyn watched every scrap of the tenderness drain out of his face and something cold and old and lethal come up behind his eyes. The killer he used to be awake and looking out. He's not coming in 2 days, Nathan said quietly. No, said Margaret. He's already here. Nathan lowered the paper and looked up the empty North Road where Richard and Pruitt had ridden out not 10 minutes before, ridden out toward Delacroix. Evelyn had thought to fetch him. But you don't ride a day and a half to fetch a man who's already in the county. You ride out to report. To tell him it worked. To tell him the ghost had surfaced in Red Hollow, standing in the street in the open at last. He's been here the whole time. He came ahead of his own wire. He wanted eyes on me before I knew to run. Nathan crumpled the yellow paper in his fist. Pruitt didn't send that message this morning to call Delacroix in. He sent it to tell Delacroix the trap was sprung. He turned to Evelyn, and his voice was very gentle and very terrible. Your father didn't just ride out of town, Evelyn. He rode out to go stand next to the man who's about to ride in. And from the south end of the street, the opposite end, the wrong end, the end, nobody had been watching because everybody had been watching the road. Her father came the slow, unhurried sound of horses. A lot of horses, coming into Red Hollow at a walk. The walk of men who were in no hurry at all because they already knew that everyone they wanted was exactly where they had arranged for them to be. Evelyn turned toward the sound, and Nathan stepped in front of her, and his hand, for the first time since the road at dawn, closed around the grip of his gun. There were 9 of them, and the man at the center wore no gun at all. That was how Evelyn knew him before Nathan said the name. Every other rider had iron on his hip and a hand near it, but the man in the middle rode with his hands folded loose on the saddle horn like a gentleman out for air, because a man who has 8 guns around him doesn't need to carry one, and a man who has never once done his own killing doesn't know how. He was slender and gray at the temples, and he had a face that would have looked kind in a church pew, and Evelyn understood at once that this was the most dangerous kind of cruel there was, the kind that never has to raise its voice. Etienne, Nathan said. Nathan. Delacroix reined in 20 feet off and looked at him the way you'd look at a debt finally collected. 6 years. You have no idea how tiresome you made those 6 years for me. Do you know I had men in 4 territories? Do you know what that cost? He clicked his tongue softly. And here you are, in a store girl's dusty little street, undone by the one thing every man told me would undo you. His eyes moved unhurried to Evelyn. And this is her, the bruise that called you out of hiding. He inclined his head almost courtly. Mademoiselle, you've been more useful than you'll ever comprehend. Don't look at her, Nathan said. I'll look where I please. But Delacroix's eyes came back to Nathan anyway, and there was real feeling in them now, the first crack in the churchyard calm. You were supposed to kill my brother. I paid you. You took my money. And then you stood over him, and you let him live, and you rode away. And do you know what happened to Laurent after that Nathan? Do you know what becomes of a man his enemies know he was too soft to be worth finishing? They finished him for me, slowly, because you left him alive and marked. His voice never rose, and that was the horror of it. You didn't spare my brother. You damned him. So I have not come here to kill you for disobeying me. I've come to kill you for being merciful, which turned out to be the crueler thing by far. And Evelyn watched Nathan take that like a blow to the chest, watch 6 years of a story he'd told himself. The one good thing did, the man I didn't kill, turn inside out in a single sentence. And she understood that Delacroix hadn't brought only guns. He'd brought the one weapon that could actually beat Nathan Cole Walker. which was the ruin of the single act Nathan had used to believe he was still a man. That's a lie, Evelyn said. Every eye in the street turned to her. I don't know your brother, and I don't know what happened to him, she said, and her voice carried clear and steady, the voice that had turned a town an hour before. But I know exactly what you're doing, mister, because I grew up with a master of it. You're doing what my father does. You take the one thing a person did right, the one thing they hold on to prove they're not all the way rotten, and you poison it so they'll stop fighting. My father spent 24 years telling me the only good thing about me was that I could be sold. You just spent 30 seconds telling Nathan the only good thing he ever did got a man killed. She stepped up beside Nathan, not behind him, beside him. It's the same trick. It's always the same trick, and I stopped falling for it a week ago. Delacroix studied her with something that was almost interest. You're clever. I'm practiced, Evelyn said. There's a difference. Clever is a gift. Practiced is what you get when you survive a man like you for a long time. Evelyn, Nathan's voice was low. Get behind me. No, it didn't. Please. I said no, Nathan, and I meant it the same way I meant it the last 4 times. She didn't take her eyes off Delacroix. You told me an hour ago we buy the later standing up, both of us, or you don't take it. Well, I'm holding you to your own words. I'm not getting behind you. Not ever again. And she felt, rather than saw, the town at her back, the blacksmith drifting to the mouth of the alley with a hammer that could stove a man's skull. Margaret up on the boardwalk with her little pistol and a face carved from Flint, the feed store man, and 2 others easing rifles up over a water trough. Quiet, quiet the way you move when 9 armed men have ridden into your street and you have decided, God help you, not to shut your doors. Delacroix's men felt it too. Evelyn watched them notice the angles, the high windows, the fact that this ornery little town had somehow gotten itself arranged around them while their master talked. You've made friends, Delacroix observed. She has, said Margaret Hayes. Turns out folks will stand up for a person who won't stand for being bought. Novel notion, I know. Bet it never came up in your line of work. Madam, you have a small gun and a large mouth. And you've got 8 guns and no spine to do your own killing, so I expect we're about even. A ripple of something went through Delacroix's men. Not quite laughter, but the loosening that comes right before it, and Delacroix felt his grip on the moment slipping, and did the things such men do when they feel it slip. He reached for the one lever he knew would still work. He turned in his saddle and said pleasantly, Richard, come up here. And Richard Whitmore rode up out of the pack. Evelyn's breath caught. He'd been back there the whole time among Delacroix's riders, and seeing him there, her own father folded into the ranks of the man who'd come to kill Nathan and Collector, drove the truth home in a way even the study wall hadn't. He wasn't a debtor caught in a corner. He'd chosen this. He'd ridden out of town and straight to Delacroix's side and taken his place among the guns, and he sat there now looking at his daughter with no shame at all. Your father and I have an arrangement, Delacroix said. His debt is forgiven the moment you're in my custody and Walker's in the ground. Simple. Clean. He gets his life back. I get my justice, and you, the courtly nod again, get to go home. Home, Evelyn repeated. Home. To your father. To Mr. Crane, who is still very much willing, I'm told. To the life that was arranged for you. Delacroix spread his hands. I'm not an unreasonable man, mademoiselle. I have no quarrel with you. Step away from Walker, come to me, and no one else in this street need be harmed. These good people can go back to their stores. Your town survives. All it costs is you going back to exactly where you were a week ago. That's the whole price. He smiled his churchyard smile. Surely 1 week of freedom isn't worth all these lives. And there it was, the real trap. Not the guns, the bargain. Delacroix had looked at her for 90 seconds and found the exact soft place, the one her father had spent 24 years digging. It's your fault. It's your choice. All these people will die, and it will be because you wanted a thing you had no right to want. Go back in the box and everyone lives. Stay free and their blood is on you. Evelyn felt the whole weight of it land on her chest, and for one terrible second, she wavered because she did feel it, the pull of it, the old deep training that said, you are the problem, you have always been the problem, make yourself small and the hurting stops. Then she looked at the blacksmith in the alley mouth. He met her eyes, and he shook his head once, don't you do it. And she remembered what he'd said. I've hated myself 20 years for standing in that street and doing nothing, and she understood that going back in the box wouldn't save these people. It would only rob them of the one thing they'd decided to reclaim by standing here. It would tell every one of them that the blacksmith had been right to do nothing 20 years ago, that a person really was worth less than a quiet afternoon, that the safe cowardice was the wise one after all. Delacroix wasn't offering to spare them. He was offering to make them complicit, to buy the whole town back into the belief that people can be sold if the price is right and the fear is high enough. No, Evelyn said. Consider carefully. I've considered. Her voice didn't shake, and she was done being surprised that it didn't. You want me to believe that if I trade myself back into a cage, everybody goes home safe. But that's not a mercy, mister. That's just the sale again, dressed up as kindness. You're doing what my father did on that street an hour ago. You're trying to sell me my own guilt, so I'll put the collar back on myself and save you the trouble. She lifted her chin. But here's what you don't understand, and same as he never did. These people aren't standing here to protect a thing that can be bought back. They're standing here because they finally found something in themselves that can't be. And if I climb up on your horse to save their lives, I don't save anything. I just prove you were right all along, and I won't do that to them. They didn't stand up for me, so I could hand you a reason it was pointless. She heard Margaret make a small sound behind her, something between a ch and a war cry. You, Delacroix said softly, and for the first time the churchyard calm was entirely gone, are becoming a problem far larger than the man I came here to kill. Now you're getting it. Richard, Delacroix didn't look away from Evelyn. You told me she was broken, biddable. You told me she'd been raised to obey. She was, Richard said, and Evelyn heard incredibly a threat of something in her father's voice she'd never heard before. Not anger, not scorn, but a kind of baffled fear, as though the ground had shifted under a thing he'd been standing on his whole life. She was. This isn't her. This isn't how I made her. No, Papa, Evelyn said, and she turned to look at him full on one last time. It isn't how you made me. It's what was under everything you made. Yes, you spent 24 years piling stones on it, so it'd never see daylight. And then you handed me to men worse than you, and you finally piled on one stone too many, and it broke the surface. Her voice cracked but held. You didn't raise a daughter who obeys. You raised one who learned to wait, and I am done waiting. For a moment, one moment, something moved across Richard Whitmore's face that might in another man, in another life, have become shame. Evelyn saw it. She would think about it for years afterward, that flicker, and never be sure what it was. But whatever it was, Delacroix didn't give it room to grow. Enough, Delacroix said. Kill Walker. Take the girl. If the town interferes, kill the town. Richard, your debt is settled the moment. His debt's not settled, Nathan said. He said it quietly, but it cut clean across Delacroix's order and stopped it dead. And something in how he said it, flat, certain, almost bored, made every man in the street go still. His debt's not settled, Nathan said again, because you can't settle it. That's the thing I've been turning over since Placer Junction, Etienne, and I finally got it. You didn't come all this way for me, 6 years, 4 territories, a man who wanted me dead, that bad could have had me dead a dozen quiet ways. Poison. A backshot in a hotel. You didn't want me dead, you wanted me to watch. He took a slow step forward, and 2 of Delacroix's men twitched their guns up, and Nathan didn't so much as glance at them. You wanted me to see you do to somebody else the thing I stopped you doing to your brother. You needed me to stand here and watch you take this girl so you could prove to yourself that mercy was the mistake, and you were right all along. Same trick she just called. You are not collecting a debt, Etienne Barche. You're trying to talk yourself out of the one doubt you've carried for 6 years, the doubt that maybe the man who spared your brother saw something you couldn't. Delacroix's face had gone white. Laurent wasn't finished off because I was merciful, Nathan said, and his voice dropped, and it was the gentlest and most lethal Evelyn had ever heard it. Laurent was finished off because you let it happen. Because a marked man is only worthless to the brother who won't protect him. I didn't damn your brother, Etienne. You did. And you've spent 6 years hunting the one witness who might have said so, because as long as I was out there somewhere, you couldn't quite finish telling yourself the lie. He spread his empty hand. So here I am, in the open, just like you wanted. Now you've got to actually do it in front of 40 people and find out whether killing me makes the doubt go away." He smiled terrible and sad. "It won't. I can tell you that for free. I killed a lot of men trying to make my own doubts go quiet. They never do. You just add the new ones to the pile." The street held its breath, and Evelyn, watching Delacroix's face, saw the exact thing Nathan had gambled everything on, saw the gunman glance at their master and find him rattled, saw the certainty that had held 8 hard men in formation begin for one fatal second to waver. Because hired guns don't ride for a man, they ride for a man's certainty, and Delacroix had just cracked in public. That was the second Richard Whitmore chose to end it his own way. Later, Evelyn would understand that he did it not to help Delacroix, but to reclaim control of a moment that had gotten away from every man in it except his daughter, that her father, watching Evelyn dismantle 2 dangerous men with nothing but her voice, could not bear one instant longer to be the only person on that street with no power in it. He drew. Fast from the pack, his gun coming up not toward Nathan, but toward Evelyn, because if he could not own her, then some rotten final thing in him had decided no one would. And Evelyn saw the barrel swing toward her and had time to think with strange calm, of course it ends with him. It was always going to be him. 3 things happened at once. Nathan moved faster than she'd ever seen a person move. The 6 years of running peeled away in an instant to show the thing underneath, and his gun was out and up before her father's had finished rising. The blacksmith threw his hammer, and Margaret Hayes fired. The hammer took Richard's horse in the shoulder, and the animal screamed and lurched, and Margaret's shot went wide in the chaos, and Richard's own gun barked once into the sky as the horse bucked, and Nathan's did not go wide. Nathan's shot took the gun clean out of Richard Whitmore's hand, blew it spinning into the dirt, and left him sitting there on a screaming horse with a bloodied, empty, ruined hand, staring at his daughter, disarmed in front of the whole town, exactly as powerless as he had spent his life making sure she'd be. Nathan hadn't killed him. He'd had the shot, a dozen witnesses would swear to it after, and he'd chosen the hand instead of the heart, and Evelyn understood why in the same instant everyone else did. A certain kind of former kind of man. It's the one crack in him, even now. Even with a gun pointed at the woman he loved, Nathan Cole Walker had chosen not to kill. And this time the mercy wasn't weakness, and it wasn't a mistake. This time it was the whole point. This time in front of 40 people and 8 guns, and the man who'd built his cruelty into a philosophy, Nathan proved that you could be the fastest and most dangerous man in the street and still choose not to become the thing that had come to collect. And it broke Delacroix, not the gunplay, the choice. Evelyn watched it land on him, watched the man see Nathan spare a father who just tried to murder his own daughter, and watched the 6-year-old doubt finish cracking him wide open, because there it was in front of him, undeniable mercy that wasn't soft. Mercy that was harder and braver and more powerful than any killing. Mercy that had just disarmed the enemy without ending him. And Delacroix had spent 6 years in 4 territories, and God knew what fortune to prove. Such a thing didn't exist, and it had just happened in a dusty street in front of everyone. "You see it now," Nathan said quietly, gun still smoking held low. "Don't you? That thing you came here to kill because you couldn't stand that it might be real." "Kill him," Delacroix said, but his voice had lost its bottom. "Kill them both. Kill both." But his men weren't moving. They weren't moving because the whole shape of the street had changed in the space of 3 heartbeats, and hired guns can count. They could see the rifles over the water trough, and the blacksmith already bending for a second tool, and Margaret reloading with the flat competence of a woman who'd meant every word about burying husbands, and they could see, worst of all, that their employer had come apart in public. And there is nothing 8 hard men trust less than a paymaster who's lost his nerve where they can see it. One of them, the one nearest the front, a scarred man who'd clearly done this 100 times, looked at Delacroix, then at Nathan, then at the rifles, and said flat, "This ain't the job I signed for. Job was one ghost in the open, not a whole town and a hero shooting guns out of hands." He holstered his iron. "I don't die for a debt that ain't mine either." And that was the crack that became the flood. One by one, then faster, Delacroix's guns came down, not in surrender exactly, but in the cold arithmetic of men who kill for money and had just watched the odds and the certainty go bad at the same moment. Within a minute, the man who'd ridden into Red Hollow with 8 guns at his back had 2. Then none but the empty air, sitting his horse alone in the middle of a street that had impossibly refused him. "I'll remember this town," Delacroix said, low, shaking. "I have money. I have reach. You'll do nothing," Evelyn said. She walked toward him. She heard Nathan say her name low, a warning, and she didn't stop because some things you have to do with your own 2 feet, or they don't count. She walked right up to the horse of the man who'd come to sell her back into a cage, and she looked up at him, small and unarmed and unafraid, and she said, "You want to know why you'll do nothing? Because 40 people just watched everything. They watched my father confess he sold me. They watched him try to shoot me. They watched you order a whole town killed over a grudge. There's no marshal in Red Hollow, but there's a circuit judge through here every spring and 40 witnesses and a signed contract in my apron with my father's own hand, pricing his daughter like livestock." She held up the folded paper again one last time. "You built your whole life on nobody being willing to stand up and say what they saw. And you just rode into the one street where everybody will." She stepped back. "Ride out. Take my father with you if you want him, though I don't think he's worth much to you now since the only thing he ever had to trade just told a whole town what he is. But if you ever come back, if any of you ever come back, there won't be a story to tell because there won't be anybody left to tell it to. Now go." And Etienne Delacroix, who had never in his life been dismissed, who had come to prove that mercy was a lie and people were property, and the world belonged to men who understood that, turned his horse and rode out of Red Hollow with his ruined debtor trailing behind him, beaten by a store girl, with a piece of paper, in a town that had finally decided to remember its own spine. Richard Whitmore did not look back. But Evelyn watched him go, cradling his shattered hands smaller in his Sunday coat than she had ever seen him, and she waited for the grief to come, the daughter's grief, the last mourning for the father she'd never had. It didn't come. What came instead, standing in that street with the dust settling and 40 people slowly beginning to breathe again, was something she had no name for at first, something light and terrible and enormous. And then she found the word, and the word was free. Not free of him because he was gone, free of him because he no longer lived inside her. He'd finally done the one thing that emptied him out of her completely. He'd shown her in front of everyone the very bottom of what he was, and there had turned out to be nothing there to grieve. Her legs went. For the 3rd time that day, her legs simply quit. And for the 3rd time, Nathan was there and he caught her. And she turned in his arms and gripped the front of his coat in both fists and didn't cry. Couldn't was past crying, only held on while the whole street erupted around them, the blacksmith roaring something wordless. Margaret Hayes sitting down hard on the boardwalk step and laughing and weeping at once, the whole town coming loose all at the same time in the giddy, shaking aftermath of people who have stood in front of death together and lived. "It's over," Nathan said against her hair, and his own voice was not steady. This man who used to kill for money, his voice was not steady at all. "It's over, Evelyn. He's gone. They're both gone. You did it. You..." He pulled back to look at her, and there were tears standing in his eyes, unashamed. "I've been alive 39 years, and I have never once seen anybody do what you just did. You didn't beat them with a gun. You beat them with the truth out loud, where everybody could hear it. You beat them by refusing to be sold one more time, no matter what it cost. Do you understand what you are?" "Tell me," Evelyn whispered, because she had spent her whole life being told what she was by men who wanted to use her, and she wanted just once to hear it from a man who didn't. "You're the bravest thing I ever met," Nathan Colewalker said. "And I've met a lot of brave men, and every one of them was brave with a gun in his hand. You did it with empty hands and a piece of paper in your own 2 feet in the middle of a street. There's not a gunslinger in this whole territory got the sand you've got." His forehead came down to hers. "And I have spent 6 years running from every place I ever stood, and I want you to hear me say this while the dust's still settling, so you know I mean it, and it isn't the fear talking. I'm done running. I'm not riding on. Whatever you build here, out of all this, out of that store and that ledger and this town that just bled for you, I want to stand next to it. Next to you, if you'll have a man with the past I've got." Evelyn looked up at him, and she thought of every man who had ever wanted her for what she could give them, and she thought of the one who had ridden up on a road at dawn and asked her first before anything what happened to you, and had wanted only and simply to know. "I told you once," she said, "that I didn't have a word for what this was because I'd never had the thing that gets the word. She let go of his coat finally and took his face in her hands the way he'd taken hers, gentle, like something she was afraid of breaking and had decided to hold anyway. I've got the word now. Yeah, Evelyn said, but I'm not going to say it standing in a street full of people who just saved my life. I'm going to say it later. In a quiet place. That we picked. Her voice broke, and this time it broke into something like a laugh, the first true one in 6 years. Because that's the whole point, isn't it? That I get to choose the later now. That I get to choose all of it. All of it. Nathan agreed, and his arm came around her, and they turned together to face the town. Her town now, the one that had stood up, and Margaret Hayes hollered from the boardwalk. Step, well, don't just stand there bleeding romance all over my clean street. The both of you, somebody's got to help me count what's left of the nails. And the whole street laughed, the ragged, disbelieving, alive laughter of people who had chosen to stand and had not this time lost everything for it. And Evelyn Whitmore, who had climbed out a window 9 days ago with $11 in a dead woman's necklace and no plan, but away stood in the middle of a street that had refused to let her be sold, held up by a man who had refused to ride past her and understood that she had not in the end been rescued by anyone at all. She had walked out of that cage on her own 2 feet every single time, and she was never going back in. She said the word 3 nights later in a quiet place they picked the back step of the Mercantile after the town had finally stopped coming by to shake her hand, and the word was love. And Nathan heard it and didn't say anything back for a long moment. And then he said, I know, I've known since the road. And that was how Evelyn Whitmore learned that some men don't need the word said first because they've been living inside it all along. But love, it turned out, was the easy part. The hard part came the next morning when the town that had bled for her stood around in the street not quite looking at her because the danger was gone now. And nobody knew what came after danger. And Evelyn understood that a town can rise up for one desperate afternoon and then quietly go back to shutting its doors, and that if she wanted Red Hollow to be anything more than the place she'd survived, she was going to have to build it into that with her own 2 hands. You could go anywhere now, Margaret told her over the ledger. You've got a name in 3 counties. Woman who faced down Etienne Delacroix and lived. You could go to a real city, marry that man, keep books for a bank. Never think about this dusty little nothing of a town again. She said it without looking up. That's what I'd have told my own daughter to do if I'd had one. Is that what you want me to do? No, Margaret said. But I'm a selfish old woman and I've buried 2 husbands and I'd like some company before they put me in the ground so my wanting doesn't count. Evelyn closed the ledger. There's a piece of land, she said, north of the creek. Nobody's on it, I asked. Margaret looked up. There are women out there, Margaret, all over this territory. Women in the exact house I climbed out of with the exact father or the exact husband and no road out because there's nowhere for the road to go. I had a window and a horse and a full moon and I still barely made it, and I was one of the lucky ones. Most of them don't have a Bess. Most of them don't meet a Nathan on the road. Her voice steadied into the thing it did now, the thing that turned rooms. I want to build them somewhere to go, a working place, a ranch, a business, real work, and real wages, so a woman who runs doesn't have to choose between the cage and starving. So the road out actually ends somewhere. She met the older woman's eyes. I know how to keep a ledger. I know how to run a place on nothing. I learned at keeping my father's ranch alive while he gambled it dead. He taught me every skill I'd need to destroy everything he stood for, and he never even knew he was doing that. Margaret Hayes was quiet a long moment. Then she reached under the counter and drew out a strongbox and set it on the ledger with a heavy final sound. 30 years of this store, she said. 2 dead husbands worth of savings and nobody to leave it to. I was going to let the bank have it when I died and the bank can go hang. She pushed it across. You want to build a road that ends somewhere? Well, old women with money and no children are the most dangerous people in the world, girl. And it's about time somebody pointed me at something worth being dangerous for. And that was how it started. Not with romance, not with a wedding, but with a strongbox and a ledger and 2 women deciding to be dangerous together. Nathan built the first barn himself. He wouldn't take help with it, not at first, and Evelyn didn't understand why until she found him one evening, sitting on a half-finished wall, with his hands hanging between his knees, and she sat down beside him and waited because she'd learned that Nathan told the truth if you gave the silence room. Every wall I ever put up in my life, he said finally, I put up to hide behind, cover, angles, a place to shoot from or a place to run to. He turned his hands over, looked at the blisters on them, the honest hurt of a day's building. This is the first thing I ever built that's meant to keep somebody safe instead of keep me alive. His voice caught. I didn't know it'd feel like this, like I'm allowed to, like a man who did what I did gets to make a thing that shelters instead of a thing that kills. You get to, Evelyn said. You sure? Because there is men in the ground because of me, Evelyn. That doesn't wash off because a good woman looked at me on a road. No, she agreed. It doesn't wash off. I don't want it to wash off. A man who forgets what he did is a man who could do it again. She took one of his ruined hands in both of hers. But it can be paid, not paid off, not erased, paid forward. Every wall you put up here is a wall some woman hides behind instead of gets caught behind. You spent 9 years being the thing that came in the night. You get to spend the rest of it being the thing that stands between the night and somebody who can't stand for herself yet. She pressed his hand. That's not forgiveness, Nathan. I can't give you that. It's not mine to give. It's better than forgiveness. It's use. You get to be useful to the exact people you'd have been hired to hurt. That's the only real penance there is. He looked at her for a long time. Then he picked the hammer back up. They were married that fall in the finished barn by a circuit preacher who'd heard the story and rode 40 miles out of his way to do it for free. Evelyn wore her mother's necklace on the outside of her collar for the first time in her life, the little gold locket catching the light for everyone to see. And when the preacher asked who gave this woman, there was a silence because everyone in that barn knew the answer to that question, had died a hard death in a dusty street. And then Margaret Hayes stood up in the front row and said loud, "She gives herself. That's the whole point of her. Get on with it." And the whole barn laughed and wept, and that was the wedding. The ranch grew slowly. That was the truth of it, and Evelyn refused always to tell it any prettier than it was because women would come to her later. Broken women fresh out of their own windows, and she would not lie to them about how hard the building had been. The first winter nearly finished them. The second year, a bank in the county seat tried to call in a note that wasn't theirs to call, and Evelyn rode 2 days to sit in a lawyer's office and take them apart line by line with the ledger skills her father had sneered at. And she won because a woman who taught herself a double-entry bookkeeping by candlelight to save a ranch she'd inherit only as a bride is not a woman a country bank can frighten. The first woman came in the spring of the second year. She came the way Evelyn had come at dawn on a spent horse with a mark on her face and a child on her hip, and eyes that had learned to check every exit in a room. And Evelyn walked out to meet her, and she did not say, "You're safe now," because she'd learned that safe was a word that meant nothing to a woman who'd never had it. She said the only thing that had ever meant anything. What happened to you? And the woman broke the way Evelyn had broken on that road because someone had asked instead of assessed. They named the place Whitmore Station, and Evelyn insisted on the name over everyone's objection. And when Nathan asked her why she'd hang her father's name on the one good thing she'd ever built, she said, because he thought that name was his. He thought it meant a ranch and cattle and a man everybody feared. I'm taking it back. 50 years from now, when somebody says Whitmore, I want it to mean the place women went when they had nowhere. I want to steal the name right out of his grave and make it mean the exact opposite of everything he was. She smiled hard and bright. That's not revenge, Nathan. Revenge would be forgetting him. This is better. This is making him spend eternity as the founder of the thing he'd have hated most. And that, in the end, was what became of Richard Whitmore's name. The man himself they heard died 2 winters on poor alone. His hand never healed, right in a boarding house in a town nobody could remember the name of, still owing a debt that Delacroix, in the end, never bothered to collect, because a man who's lost his nerve in front of a whole town isn't worth the ride. Evelyn got the word by letter. She read it standing at the window of the house she'd built, and she waited one last time for the grief. And this time something did come, but it wasn't grief. It was a kind of vast, quiet pity, the pity you feel for a man who was handed a daughter and a home and a name and could think of nothing to do with any of them but sell them, and who died with empty hands in an empty room, having never once in his whole life understood that the thing he kept trying to own had been the only thing that could have saved him. "You all right?" Nathan asked from the doorway. He died the way he lived, Evelyn said, trying to figure out what everything was worth and never once figuring out that some things aren't for sale. She folded the letter. I'm not sad, Nathan. I keep waiting to be sad, and I'm just glad I'm not him. That's the whole inheritance he left me. The absolute certainty that I never want to be what he was. She put the letter in the fire and never spoke of him again, except to the women who needed to hear that a father like that could be survived. Delacroix they never saw again, but his name surfaced now and then in the strangest way because the story of Red Hollow traveled the way true stories do, growing truer as it went. And men who moved in the dark parts of the territory began to know that there was one town where a debt couldn't be collected in human beings, and that the town had friends. Because Nathan had friends. That was the last thing Evelyn learned about the man she married, that the rumors on the road had been true, that in his running years, he'd fallen in with a loose brotherhood of riders. Hard men with hard pasts who'd made themselves into something on the far side of their own sins. Men who protected the ones nobody else would protect and asked nothing but that the favor be passed down the line. They came the first time the winter arrival outfit tried to burn Whitmore Station to the ground. Overwater rights came riding in out of nowhere, a dozen of them, and stood between the fire and the women, and left again before the smoke cleared, and Evelyn never knew how Nathan had sent the word or how they'd come so fast. She only knew that when she asked him who they were, he said, "Men I used to ride with when I was running. Turns out you can't outrun everybody. Some of them you just keep." And that when she asked what they believed what held such men together, he told her the whole creed of it in 3 lines. The thing they carried from ruined life to ruined life, the thing that had made a former killer rein in his horse on a road at dawn instead of riding past. Nobody should be owned. Nobody should be silenced. Nobody should face the dark alone. And Evelyn heard those 3 lines and understood at last the whole shape of the thing that had happened to her, that she had climbed out a window. Running from the first of those and straight into the arms of the men who lived by the last of them, and that it hadn't been luck, and it hadn't been coincidence, and it hadn't, in the end, been her father's trap either. It had been the truest thing there is, that cruelty, however vast, is always one lonely man in a boarding house, and that the people who refuse it, the Besses who leave a burlap sack, the Margarets who fire the first shot, the blacksmiths who finally stop standing still, the Nathans who cannot ride past a bruise, the women who ask what happened to you instead of what are you worth, those people find each other. They always find each other. That is the one thing the Richard Whitmores of the world can never account for, and it is the thing that beats them every single time. The years came on the way years do. Whitmore Station grew until it wasn't one ranch, but a name that meant a network of them ranches and boarding houses and honest work strung across the territory like lamps in a row, and women who'd come to it broken stayed to run it, and some of them left to build their own. And the road out of the cage stopped being a road. One lucky woman found in the dark and became a thing that was simply there, known, findable, real. Evelyn kept the ledgers for all of it until her hands got too old. And then she taught a girl who'd come to her at dawn with a mark on her face to keep them, and that girl taught another, and the skill her father had sneered at as beneath a woman kept an empire of freedom running for 50 years. Margaret Hayes lived long enough to be dangerous for another 18 years, which she said was the best stretch of her whole life, and she died in her own bed in the back of the store, with Evelyn holding one hand and a former runaway holding the other, and her last words were a complaint about the price of nails, and Evelyn laughed through her tears and knew it was exactly how the old woman would have wanted to go. And Nathan built walls for the rest of his life, barns and bunkhouses and fences, and the long, low houses where the women slept safe, wall after wall after wall, each one the opposite of the walls he'd hidden behind, and every board of it a payment made forward on a debt that could never be paid off and didn't need to be. He grew old beside Evelyn on the land they'd built, and the gun that used to hang on his hip hung instead over the mantel, unloaded, kept only so that the youngest women who came through, frightened, could see a man put a weapon down and choose to leave it down every day on purpose. "You ever miss it?" Evelyn asked him once when they were both gray. "The running, the man you were." "No," Nathan said. "I spent 39 years looking for a place I could stop, and I thought it was a place. It wasn't all on a place." He took her old hand in his old hand. "It was you. It was always going to have to be a person, not a place, because a place you can always ride away from. But you were the first thing I ever found that I wanted to ride toward." He smiled the same slow smile she'd first seen in a dusty street a lifetime ago. The person who saves your life isn't always the one who fights your battles for you, Evelyn. Sometimes it's the one who reminds you that you were strong enough to fight them yourself. You did that for me. Everybody thinks I found you on that road and saved you. He shook his head. You saved me. You just let me think it was the other way around long enough that I got to be useful. Evelyn Whitmore wore her mother's necklace every day for the rest of her long life, on the outside of her collar, in the open where anyone could see it, and she never once again feared a single soul on this earth. Because she had learned the only thing that had ever been worth learning, learned it climbing out a window and facing down a killer and refusing every single time to be sold, that no father, no husband, no debt, no man with 8 guns and a churchyard, smile, no cruelty, however vast and however patient, can own a human being who has decided all the way down in the deepest and quietest room of herself, in the place her father piled all those stones on, and never once managed to bury that she belongs to no one but herself. She had decided that on a road at dawn with a rock in her hand. She never once undecided it. And that is the whole of the story of the daughter who was treated like property, and the cowboy who could not ride past her, and the town that finally remembered its spine. The story of how a woman with $11 and a dead mother's necklace walked out of a cage on her own 2 feet and built a door for every woman who came after her. Nobody owned her. Nobody silenced her. And in the end, she was the one who made sure nobody ever had to face the dark alone again.